Chapter 20. The Clue of the Candle. Raymond Hill's eyes glowed with admiration as he arose and escorted Nancy to the door. "I will let you know just as soon as any reply from New Fernwild arrives," he said. "I am sure you are on the right track, Nancy." "I hope we are," Nancy replied modestly. "It is only a hunch, of course, but we must overlook no possibility." Nancy drove directly home and learned that her father and Sadie had not yet come back from attending to the affairs of the Sydney estate. That gave Nancy a chance to relax in a porch hammock and to read a little. She heard steps on the floor and called out, "Is that you, Sadie?" "Not exactly," a deep masculine voice replied, and Nancy jumped from the hammock to confront Ned Nickerson. "Why, Ned, where in the world did you come from?" Nancy cried with sincere pleasure. "And how sunburned you are! Have you been at camp?" "No, I have been working, believe it or not," the young man replied, seating himself on the porch steps and stretching his muscular arms. "Feel that muscle, Nancy. I'll be fit as a fiddle for football when college opens again." "Working, Ned? Where? And at what?" Nancy asked. "And can you stay for luncheon?" "Golly, I wish I could," Ned replied, looking at Nancy with admiration. "But duty calls. In fact, I'm playing hooky this minute. I thought I'd make a stab at earning my own way this summer instead of loafing and letting Dad support me, so I got a job at High Point Inn." "Where is that? Are you the manager or a dishwasher?" Nancy laughed. "Oh, nothing as responsible as either," Ned laughed back. "I drive the bus that meets all trains, carry trunks upstairs and down again, take timid, elderly ladies rowing on the river, and make myself generally useful, including pushing a lawnmower. It's interesting, and it surely has kept me in perfect form." "How thrilling, Ned, and how commendable!" Nancy exclaimed. "Where did you say High Point Inn is?" "Down the river about 40 miles, Ned said. "It is a rather popular, quiet sort of family resort." "How did you get here, then?" Nancy asked. "Did you row one of the guests up?" "Oh, nothing as strenuous as that," Ned replied. "I came up to get a couple the management just hired, a new assistant head waiter and his wife, who comes well recommended as a pastry cook. I'll soon find out how good her recommendations are, I'll wager." "Are they River Heights people?" Nancy asked. Her interest in the High Point Inn's new servants suddenly heightened. "They're at a cheap boarding house down on Cadillac Street," Ned said. "Where is Cadillac Street?" "The number is 32, and it's called the Elite Mansion, if you can imagine that." "Cadillac Street? You go down 3 blocks to the first traffic signal and turn right 3 blocks downhill. It runs along the river, and number 32, I judge, would be to the left," Nancy explained. "Who are these celebrated kitchen folks? French chefs?" "Queer sort of name," Ned replied. "Cement, or something like that. Cemetery? No, Cemet. Used to have a place of their own, they said, until a crooked lawyer cheated them out of the property. There's a chance for your father to pick up some business, setting wrongs right and so forth, hey?" "I'll mention it to him," Nancy smiled. "Must you really go?" "I certainly must. I might lose my job," Ned said. "As long as I was in town, I thought I'd take a few minutes to call, and I'm glad I found you at home, Nancy. Come down to High Point for a weekend with your father. I'll pretend I don't know you when I carry your baggage upstairs, but I'll expect an extra-large tip, though. Goodbye, Nancy. I'll write you a postcard anyhow, and be sure to make no engagements for the 3rd week in November. Remember the big game." With that farewell, Ned strode off, leaped to the seat of the trim green station wagon he had parked at the curb, and with a final wave he was gone, leaving a very happy Nancy behind. The Semets were gone! That indeed was joyful news for Sadie alone. It was not long before Sadie and Carson Drew drove up to the house for lunch. "Good news, Sadie," Nancy cried, running to meet them. "There are a dozen boxes upstairs in your room with the rest of yesterday's purchases in them, and the Semmets have moved 40 miles away." "Oh, I'm so glad," Sadie cried, while Mr. Drew echoed her sentiments more vigorously. Nancy explained how she had learned of the Semmets' departure. "Fine," Mr. Drew said. "Sadie and I have been to the old Twisted Candles and replaced the court seal on the door of the tower room with a stout padlock. The guards are still there, but knowing that the Semmets are out of the city is the best security of all." "I wonder if I might be permitted to prowl around the tower room this afternoon then," Nancy said to her father as Sadie ran upstairs to unpack her new wardrobe. "I think I am on the trail of Sadie's parents," Nancy explained. "There might be some clue in the tower room to help me." "Here's the key," Mr. Drew said. "Will you explain your clues now, or would you rather wait until they develop?" His eyes twinkled, for he knew Nancy preferred not to divulge her plans until she had them all in working order, and as he expected, and understood it should be added, Nancy said she would rather not discuss her scheme until it produced some promise of results. Accordingly, after luncheon, Nancy and Sadie drove off together toward the now-closed tea-house. The guard at the old mansion was dubious about permitting Nancy to enter the locked room, although she displayed the key and proofs of her identity. "I don't know, miss," the burly man said with a shake of his head. "There's been more than one person around trying to get into that room. One guy said he'd give me a month's wages if I let him in for just 15 minutes. "Well, I'm not offering any bribes," Nancy said. "My father is the attorney for this estate, as I told you, and this young woman is the owner. What did the persons look like who tried to enter?" At the man's description of the two men who had at various times sought entrance to Asa Sidney's study, Nancy and Sadie exchanged glances. "Peter Boonton! And Jacob Sidney!" "You know him, then?" the guard asked. "We do indeed, and I shall commend you to my father for not accepting the bribes," Nancy said warmly. "You will lose nothing by being honest." Greatly mollified, the guard hemmed and hawed, and then said he would permit Nancy to enter the room if Sadie would remain outside as a guarantee of good faith, and if Nancy would promise to lock the door behind her. "How can I, with a padlock?" Nancy asked. "Oh, Mr. Drew put a hasp on the inside of the door, too," Sadie said. "He locked the door behind him when we were up here this morning." "Are you the young lady who was here with Mr. Drew today?" the guard asked with a greater show of confidence. "My partner told me about it when I relieved him on this post at noon." "Sure, you can go up, ladies." "I'll stay down anyhow," Sadie said. "It would make me feel too sad to see the room again so soon after Mr. Sidney's death." Nancy mounted the familiar stairs by herself, unlocked the heavy padlock, and entered the musty, stuffy tower room, which needed airing badly. She locked the door behind her and then paused to survey the room. "What is it about the room that seems so unusual?" she asked herself. "Oh, I know. All the candles standing around it, and some of them in such odd places." Like a good general, Nancy sat down to plan her campaign before beginning any action. "Those oddly twisted candles certainly are in queer nooks," she mused. "I wonder if that is significant of anything." On the mantel shelf of the fireplace stood two handsome, stately candles in silver holders. "I believe those pieces," thought the speculating girl, "will bring real money as valuable antiques someday." She placed a chair before the yawning opening of the fireplace and climbed upon its rush-bottomed seat. Carefully, she fingered the heavy pieces as she stood up closely to survey the beautiful objects. I wonder, she mused as she lightly touched the shelf, if a brick below this holder isn't a bit uneven. Nancy rather thought the stone tilted as she replaced the holder onto the shelf. Cautiously stepping off the old chair, she pushed it to the opposite end of the shelf where the twin candles stood. The light from the window fell directly on the shelf at this point. I do see something different up here, muttered the girl. It's another loose brick at this end. At once, Nancy set to work to pry up the loosened bricks. It was a tedious task, and several times the low chair threatened to tip perilously, but the determined girl stuck to her job. I must help Sadie to find the hidden valuables, and if each candle mark is, as I think, a treasure spot, it will be easy. She drew forth a tightly rolled package, heavily bound with a leather thong. Quickly, she stepped off the chair and laid the heavy package down on it, then untied the fastening. Revealed were $20 gold pieces, neatly wrapped in single packages of $100 each. At the opposite end of the shelf was a similar bundle. The girl opened that one also. $3,000, calculated Nancy rapidly. How remarkable! Mr. Sidney was a queer but lovable old man. Now I know how to reveal more of his precious secrets for Sadie. Hastily, the young detective put the gold packages back into their hiding places, lest someone enter and guess her plan. Nancy turned toward the tower window, still hoping to find a clue pertaining to the parentage of the faithful young heiress. She walked slowly toward the massive, carved desk table that filled the space below the center window, on which stood the biggest twisted candle of all. The candle stood on a battered old Bible, which Nancy reverently moved to one side. The place where it had rested on the wood was brighter and dust-free compared with the rest of the surface, but within the border of the exposed area, her sharp eyes detected a hair-like crack. Tracing the outline of the almost invisible line, Nancy saw that it marked an oblong about a foot wide and 14 or 15 inches in length. "A secret compartment!" she exclaimed aloud. Now, how to open it? Her fingers searched the surface of the table for a spring which might release the lid of the secret compartment, but to no avail. At length, however, her patient and minute search was rewarded when she found a slight indentation on the underside of the projecting edge of the tabletop. At the pressure of her fingers, the secret compartment flew open, revealing a recess about 6 inches deep. Nancy peered inside and saw an orderly pile of papers. Should she examine them, or would it be a better plan, considering the legal tangles, to have her father take them from the secret compartment in the presence of witnesses and look at the documents? I think I'll leave it, she decided, firmly shutting the lid of the hidden recess and pushing the Bible back over the place. The ancient and well-worn book, to Nancy's great distress, fell into 2 parts as she lifted it, and several loose pages dropped to the floor. She carefully gathered them up and opened the volume to replace them in their proper order. As she turned the pages, she suddenly came upon a letter, and the printed address in the upper left-hand corner made her stand as if transfixed. It was from the new Fernwild orphanage. What would its contents reveal? Was her search already at an end? Nancy's hand trembled as she reached for the letter, which she saw was addressed in pen and ink to Asa Sidney. The stamp was of a pattern now discontinued, although the date on the cancellation mark was blurred so as to be indecipherable. Suddenly, a sharp rap on the door startled Nancy. She jumped back, permitting the cover of the Bible to fall into place, thereby concealing the letter. "Who is there?" she asked. "It's I, Nancy, Sadie," came a familiar voice through the stout panels, and Nancy quickly unlocked the door to permit her friend to enter. She carefully replaced the padlock and snapped it shut. It looks just as Mr. Sidney left it," Sadie said, surveying the room through eyes brimming with tears. "It is what he left that interests me," Nancy said. "Sadie, I hope to have more good news for you. First, let me explain why I came here to look around. I was so intent on my theory, I never stopped to consider that you might think me impudent to go poking around in your property while you were locked out." "Why, Nancy, dear, I never dreamed. I wouldn't think of... Nancy!" Sadie was incoherent in her efforts to tell Nancy how grateful she was for all that had been done for her, and Nancy smiled happily at the evidence of Sadie's trust and affection. "Hush, Sadie. Listen to me now," she said. "I have asked Mr. Hill." "Mr. Hill!" Sadie exclaimed, leaping to her feet. "I came up to tell you about Mr. Hill. He just telephoned here. He called up the house and Hannah told him we were here. He wants you to come to see him at once, and he wants to see me too." "Good!" Nancy cried. "He must have an answer from New Fernwild." Sadie looked bewildered, and Nancy hastened to explain. "With Mr. Hill's help, I located the orphanage, and he surprised me by telling me that his father had been trustee of the place years ago. I asked him to telegraph there to find out about you, and to find out if Mr. Sidney had been interested in the asylum while you were sheltered there." "Why in the world?" Sadie asked. "Sadie, I can't prove anything yet, but I believe there is proof within arm's length of me now, if Mr. Hill hasn't it already, that Mr. Sidney left you his fortune because you are his rightful heir." Sadie leaned back in her seat, her face white. Do you mean that she began. "I mean that I believe you are related to him," Nancy said. "And now, in this old Bible..." At that moment, a frightful howl echoed through the old house, followed by a reverberating crash. End of chapter 20.